There you go.
Nice.
All right. So, I want to start off. Could we start off with you introducing yourself?
Sure. So my name's Vanessa. I live in Philadelphia. I'm an Egyptologist. I um I used to work my work used to really focus on sort of the intersection of text and art. So when you think about wall scenes in temples and tombs and how there'll be hieroglyphic text, but there's large scale art, and I would look at how those interacted with each other. And recently, let's say in the last 4 years or so, I've started focusing on early 20th century history of Egyptology. And because I was aware of the fact that in the US, there's the Egyptology that's taught in programs like which I went to University of Chicago to get my PhD. Um, so there's like the Egyptology of programs like that. And then there's another Egyptology in the US that I started seeing more and more of. I mean, I saw it on the south side of Chicago in terms of like, like the sorts of t-shirts that people wear that talk about ancient Egypt or that have, ancient Egyptian iconography on it. And then later I lived in the Bay Area. I lived in Berkeley, California, and there's a lot of mural art in Berkeley and Oakland. And so I started seeing it more and more in mural art out there where people were taking ancient Egyptian, sort of expressing the ancient art, but in a modern way. And none of that is taught in the sort of programs that I went to. None of it, they don't even care about it. And that was really frustrating to me. And because to me, that's like the most exciting part, is how people today are interacting with the ancient culture and identifying with it and sort of repurposing its symbols. So I wanted to find a way to start working on that sort of approach to the ancient material. And I just started doing reading, like sort of whatever, just anything random reading. And I came across an editorial that Marcus Garvey wrote
Mm-hmm.
in the 1920s. And in this editorial, he's attacking an Egyptologist who was a professor at Harvard at the time, because that professor was saying that the ancient Egyptians were white, and Marcus Garvey was like, "Come on, what are you talking about?" And so that sort of is what began the current project that I'm working on, which is people of African descent in America in the early 20th century. So I'm really focusing on like 1900 to 1925. And how those intellectuals were engaging with Egyptology the way that it was taught in universities, right? Because Marcus Garvey was attacking this Harvard professor, right? So he was attacking this academic discipline of Egyptology. And he was right, by the way. The Harvard professor was incorrect. But I started uncovering other conversations like that between sort of white professors, either in the US or in the UK or in France, and intellectuals of African descent in the US. And so that's the project I'm working on now, is like writing up all of this material and sort of making it known to people, because certainly Egyptologists in the programs like the one I was at Chicago, they don't know anything about this. And a lot of other people I talk to who aren't involved in Egyptology programs don't know about this. So even like, for instance, people who work on Marcus Garvey aren't really familiar with how he was engaging with Egyptology. So it's a good sort of crossover area that I'm working on. So, okay, there's a lot of things in the chat. What's going on here? What's the name of the profession, please? Also in the 1920s, when was the most racism happening? Oh yeah, Egyptology. There's also, I should tell you all, nubiology. Are you all familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, so I am not a nubiologist. I'm an Egyptologist. But I'll tell you, I mean, you've found me through the Nile Valley Collective website. So you know that like really when I talk about my work, sort of informal context. Like I consider this more of an informal context because we're just chatting. But if I were to do a formal context, I would really stress the fact that these are Nile Valley cultures. And I try not to put a lot of weight on like Egyptology versus Nubiology, but to think of it as a related set of cultures up and down the Nile Valley.
Yes. Um, our previous interview was with, or discussion was with, Egyptologist Karakuni. Are you
Uh-huh.
familiar with her?
Yeah.
Um, she recently, uh, what's the word? Referred us to Deborah Hurd,
Yeah.
and
Sarah
then
and I are really good friends.
yeah, and then Deborah Hurd referred us to Dr. Shakmore Kieta,
Yeah. He
and
and I are really good friends too.
then he referred us to you.
Okay.
So, um, when we spoke with Karakuni, we spoke on the racism within the Egyptology community. Would you like to delve into that?
Um, yes. Uh, I'm happy to. I'm just wondering if you mean like sort of today or if you mean historically, like over the last, let's say, 125 years or both.
I think both would be good.
Okay. So yeah, it's tough because like pretty much all of Egyptology is, I mean, it grew up in a sort of colonialist world, right? Like Egypt was occupied by the French and then the English, and it was within that colonial world that the academic discipline of Egyptology grew up, basically, in terms of the way we teach it today. I should be clear that Egyptologists will sometimes act like, oh, that's the beginning of Egyptology. And it is in terms of like it being a university discipline, but it's not in terms of, it's not as though no one was interested in ancient Egypt before that time. So, I mean, we have evidence of the ancient Egyptians themselves studying their monuments that were like older, right? So they themselves were practicing a type of Egyptology.
Hmm.
Um, and we know from um, we have documents in Arabic. So after Egypt was conquered by, well, I just skipped a step. When classical like Greek and Roman travelers, writers went to Egypt, they were interested in the monuments and studied them and tried to understand them. Once Egypt was conquered by Muslims, we have Arabic manuscripts where they're trying to like decipher what's going on with hieroglyphs, because by then the knowledge of hieroglyphs was lost. And then in Renaissance Europe, there was interest. So it's not like, oh, nobody in the world cared about Egypt until it became colonized by the French in the
Hmm.
18th century. That's not true. But it is true that that's sort of like where the academic discipline traces its origins to, which isn't right, but whatever. So anyway, so there's Egyptology is totally steeped in this colonial mindset. And so that's one serious problem. And that's something that Egyptology has been addressing a little bit. There are some books that have come out in the last like 20 years that are sort of acknowledging that and are trying to reorient the field so away from these sort of colonialist mindsets. And there's a lot more attention being paid to Egyptians themselves working on Egyptian material. So like that's positive, of course, and those are important steps to be taken. I wouldn't say that work is done by any stretch of the imagination. And on top of that is discrimination based on skin color. And so in the US, that of course takes a very specific turn, like I mentioned,
Yeah.
because of the history of racial issues in the US. It's complicated when you start thinking about Egypt today, because the attitudes that we have in the US towards race are not the same as attitudes that you're going to see in Egypt. And of course it's varied in Egypt just like it's varied in the US or any other large society. But but it's important for me in the work I do to keep the US separate from Egypt today, because the attitudes tend to be so very different. And so by that, what I'm referring to is like what's considered like Black in terms of how people look, and what's considered white in terms of how people look.
Mhm.
Um, so there are many, I mean, like, so I'll tell you all my ethnic background. My mother's family is from Lebanon, so I'm like half Arab. My father is from England, so I'm like half English, half Lebanese. Um, and like I look like white, right? And
Mhm.
and Arabs in the US tend to be considered white, but sometimes it depends, right? Like if you're more of a dark-skinned Arab, you might read to people as Black, right?
Yeah.
In Egypt, of course, there's a range of skin tones that you will see. Um, but people in Egypt who might be thought of as Black in the US might not be thought of as Black in Egypt. So
Yeah.
that's the complexity I'm trying to communicate to you all. So anyway, that was a really long side note. Okay, so how is Egyptology racist? So in the US, like we have this great tradition of African Americans and African Caribbeans, because Marcus Garvey was from the Caribbean, um, engaging with Egyptology, right? They know about the ancient culture. They know, the material, the artifacts, the history, and they're writing these histories, but they're not thought of as Egyptologists, and they're not taught in Egyptology programs today. And so I'm focusing on these early people, 1900 to 1925. It's not like the tradition ends there, because it doesn't. One of the very famous African-American Egyptologists who was never accepted within Egyptology, which is a crying shame, is Leo Hansberry. Have you all come across his name?
No. How do you spell that name?
Here, I'll put it in the chat. So Leo Hansberry went to Harvard, and he was a professor at Howard University. And I mean, he did such great work in terms of teaching at Howard, in terms of the publications that he did. Um, he was an Egyptologist, but he was never recognized by the Egyptological community, either in America or in Europe or in Egypt or anywhere. Only among African Americans was he recognized as an Egyptologist, and it's pure racism. Um, we, by which I mean my friends and I, so people like Deborah Hurd and Shamarka Keita, those of us who are doing this sort of work to tell these stories are telling Egyptologists about Leo Hansberry and about Marcus Garvey and about these other people I work on to try to undo some of this historical damage. There are more people like, here, I'm going to put another name in the chat. Sheikh Anta Diop. Have you all come across his name?
Yes, he's very
Yes,
popular.
yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So he's another one, right? Like Egyptologists in America should know who he is. And I tell you, I bet you 99% of them have never even heard his name.
Yeah.
There's a whole program at Temple University here in Philadelphia, where I live. There's a whole program of Africology, which is it is different from Egyptology, but it's really, really related. And there's someone there who is another friend of mine, Kamani Nahusi. He's a professor at Temple, and I think of him as an Egyptologist because that's the world I work in, but he's in an Africology department, and he's doing really great work. Like for instance, he wrote a book on libation rituals in ancient Egypt, but he connects that libation ritual with other cultural practices in Africa related to libation. And he's really showing the ancient Egyptian libation in its African context. So that's an example of the type of work that should be being done in Egyptology all over the place. and it's very rare to see that sort of thing done. Um, so, and Kamani is someone who most Egyptologists in the US have never heard of, right? Because he's
Yeah.
in the Africology department. I've only come to meet him in recent years, and it's been wonderful to get to know him. But this, and I don't want to say that it's only like a black white divide, because the program at Temple has graduate students who are white as well as black. And the program at Chicago that I was in has graduate students who are white as well as black, right? Like Deborah Hurd, we went to Chicago together. That's how I know her. I've known her for like 20 years now. And she's an African American woman, and I am obviously not. So it's not as though like these programs are divided in terms of only having black people or only having white people, but it's like the attitude of the academic curriculum
Yeah.
is racially divided. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
So, um, so my basis. Oh wait, am I frozen?
No.
Oh, okay. So my basis, because I've only been studying this for 6 months, and you know, I made a page. It's growing very fast. I release a lot of information, and my conclusion is that in the Egyptology community, there's not really scholars focusing strictly on like, you know, let me see, like DNA. That's what I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And, craniology, osteology, like that's what I'm into. And it's not very many scholars focusing on that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the whole point of this documentary is analyzing the controversy around the ethnicity and race of the ancient Egyptians.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like, what do you think about the historical DNA studies? Like the time, what's the word? Do you feel that the historical timeline of these DNA studies are valid enough?
So I remember we emailed about this, but I can't remember exactly what we said. So you're familiar with that article that came out in Nature Communications in like 2017?
Yeah,
Did
the
we?
2017 study and the 2011 study with King Tut.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Gosh, I forgot about that one. Um, yeah. These are problematic in a big way. And you're totally right that there are very few Egyptologists working on that, mostly because there are very few Egyptologists who know how to do that kind of work.
Yeah.
You have to be paired with a scientist who does that sort of work, right? Because I mean, yeah. So Shamarka, who sent you to me, is one of the few. So he's amazing. You know his background. Like he's got an MD and he has a PhD in Egyptology. So he's the man. He's one of the few Egyptologists who can really talk about that stuff. And when I have questions, I email him. But even Shamarko doesn't work alone, right? When he's publishing stuff about that 2017 article, because he, like myself, has a lot of problems with it. When he publishes those articles, he's publishing with other scientists. So that's just part of the problem, right? Is like most Egyptologists don't know scientists, aren't plugged into that work. It's probably not of interest to a lot of Egyptologists. I will tell you that 2017 article actually did have an Egyptologist on the team that did it, which is very sad from my perspective as an Egyptologist, because I think that article has so many problems.
Yeah.
But there it is. Do I agree with these articles? No. So for instance, the 2017 one, I mean, I've spent a lot of time with that article, and I've given a lot of talks about it, because what it's saying is dangerous. It's misinformation and it's dangerous. They chose material from this remote site in Middle Egypt that is, there's not a tremendous amount of textual information about the site, but the information that we do have tells us that there was an international community living at that site. I mean, there were people who had names that were Hebrew, right? There were people who had names that were Greek, that were Latin. Like there were also people who had Egyptian names, but it was an international community there. They basically got 3 full data sets, like from 3 separate people from the site. I mean, that's it, like 3 people. And from that, they also had some partial data sets, right? I think it was 90 partial data sets and 3 full genomic sequences. And from all that, they're trying to make some grand statement about like all of Egyptian history all up and down the Nile. And that's, I mean, you can't do that. That's just like faulty science. What you can do is make a statement about, these 3 people at this site. So yeah, so there were a lot of problems with it. And Shamarka's still publishing about it. I'm still publishing about it. We're trying to fight it however we can.
Yeah. What about the King Tut study?
So the King Tut study, it's been a long time since I've looked at that, because ever since the 2017 article came out, that's what I've been focusing on. The King Tut study, I think they talked about his parentage, right?
They said something about they seen something on a documentary on Discovery Channel, and they just pulled the DNA markers off of there and acquainted him to R1b, a European haplogroup.
I mean, how'd they do that? I can't explain that. I can't explain why they would do that. I at this point, I would call Shamarka and be like, what are they talking about, Shamarka? I mean, that's just, yeah. I can't, I'm sorry. But I can't tell you why they would do that.
Yeah.
I can talk to you a little bit about like some of the Cleopatra stuff if you want, but I see there is a hand raised. Did you have a question?
Unmute your mic.
How y'all doing?
Hey.
Good. You had a question, bro?
What y'all were asking?
We were talking about the King Tut study.
Oh yeah, did y'all seen the most recent edit of King Tut coming on? His mitochondrial DNA is K, and his Y DNA is some type of R1b, like Western European.
Yeah, that was the one they pulled off of Discovery Channel.
Cause you remember, it was a lot of R1b. I believe they probably contaminate his DNA.
Yeah, I believe that too.
Yeah, I mean, that would be one explanation for sure.
Cause don't tell me he might be R1b BAA, like a Hauser or a static marker, a Hauser marker.
Yeah. Hold on. I'm pulling up. I'm about to share my screen.
Sweet. We've been ignoring Akhenaten and Ra too, who asked us to talk about Serapis and Ptolemy the first and the second.
Oh yeah. We'll
Should we come back to that?
yeah, we'll come back to that. But first, I wanna get through this DNA segment.
Yeah.
Like, um, all right. So I'm gonna share my screen.
Because I believe his mitochondrial DNA is K, but his Y DNA definitely was tampered with.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So
Yes.
this is a presentation I made, I think a year ago. I made this a
Mhm.
year ago. I started editing it more. I started adding stuff to it a couple months ago, and so this is a 2007 study. I want to put this down here, and basically they're speaking about how they found three mummies, and
Yeah.
apparently all of them came out to I think it said like related to modern Arabs. So um like she said, the choice of area and the choice of the time period is
Yeah.
what makes the study suspicious. Now, hold on, hold on.
So foreigners, they always come into Egypt, but why you do it for one area?
Oh,
Like
here's the
one,
area right here. So this is the area where he got the um three mummies from.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Johannes Cross.
Mm-hmm.
Four mummies out of 91 selected date from the great periods of ruling native Egyptians. Only four mummies date from the time period before 1070 BC. All the others are recent. And how many of these 91 date from the domination of the Greek and Roman whites? 48. Most of them. This sample is then invalid and cannot determine the origin of the ancient Egyptians. Should we continue our critic of this study? Of 91 mummies, how many were actually genetically analyzed to determine who the ancient Egyptians were? Get this, 3. Johannes Krause begins by saying, here we present 90 mitochondrial genomes as well as a genome-wide data set from 3 individuals obtained from Egyptian mummies. The study that made so much noise all over the world and which is
yeah.
supposed to have determined who the Egyptians were is based on only 3 mummies.
You got it.
Of these 3 mummies, how many date from the great ruling by the native Egyptians? Sample, answer 0. The mummy JK2134 dates from between 776 BC and 669 BC. The mummy JK2911 dates from 269 to 560 BC. The mummy JK2888 dates from 97 to 2 BC. All these mummies date from the time when Egypt in the north was dominated by white foreigners, or I don't really say white, I say just non-African, and had a large white non-African immigrant population. These mummies cannot in any way be representative of the people or the kings of ancient Egyptian.
Yep.
In short, mummies supposed to say that the Egyptians were white come from um, a single and irrelevant site were taken in the north of Egypt, which was repeatedly under the rule of white of non-African foreigners and partly populated by non-African immigrants.
Mhm.
Uh, so basically, that study is not valid. Um, Now the King Tut one, this is my favorite.
That have European males.
Yeah.
He
A
doing that
personal,
shit for
yeah, a personal genomics company in Switzerland says they reconstructed a DNA profile of King Tutankhamun by watching the Discovery Channel, claiming the results suggest more than half of the Western European men are related to the boy king. But researchers who worked to decode Tut's genome in the first place say the claim is unscientific. Swiss genomics company, I can't pronounce their name, has launched a Tutankhamun DNA project based on what they say are genetic markers that appeared on a computer screen during a Discovery Channel special on the famous pharaoh's genetic lineage. Maybe they didn't know what they showed, but we got 16 markers from the Y chromosome from these pharaohs. Roman Schultz, the managing director of IGNA, told Live Science. If the claims are true, it will put King Tut in a genetic profile group shared with more than half of Western European men. Um, Discovery Channel has been called out for making, you know, ridiculous fake documentaries.
Mhm.
I said, interesting. So apparently, if Elmo shows Y markers of, let's say, Ramesses the first on his show, that's reliable enough to confirm that's true.
Nice.
um, but Kartzen Puschk, a geneticist at Germany's University of Tübingen, who was part of the team that unraveled Tut's DNA from samples taken from his mummy and mummies of his family members, said Ignace's claims are simply impossible. Pushed and his colleagues published part of their results, though not the Y chromosome DNA, which I also question too. Um, why they wouldn't release that. In the Journal of the American Medical Association JAMA in 2010. The Y chromosome is a sex chromosome found only in males, and looking at the genes in this chromosome will show Tut's male lineage. So yeah, that's just saying more.
You are rocking on this.
Thank you. Dr. Albert Zink from European Academy of Bolonzo Independent Research Center in Bolonzo and co-author of 2010 JAMA publication screened the footage and confirmed that the company acts very unscientific. So that's Albert Zink saying that, and that's Push saying that.
Mhm.
Um, the Swiss company did not try to get into contact with us prior to launching their new internet page. The alleged Discovery Channel markers put Tut in a genetic profile group or haplogroup that also includes more than half of the men in Western Europe. And yeah, that's repeats itself. The haplogroup R1B1A2, which Ignay claims includes King Tut's, arose 9,500 years ago in the Black Sea
Hold up,
region.
hold up,
Yeah,
hold up. They change they be changing them haplogroup names just to confuse you too. Cause
yeah,
you look at R1B VAA, it say they even named it to R1B um A1A2, like you just said, they named it too.
yeah. In another article, they said it wasn't even R1B1A. They said he was J2
Yeah,
or yeah. That's a Middle Eastern haplogroup.
I
But
believe
yeah, what you say?
I think J2 probably like somewhere in the Caucasus area.
Yeah, yeah, somewhere around there. But arose 9,500 years ago in the Black Sea region. How Tut's ancestors would have gotten from that region to Egypt is unknown. But Schultz said Igne hopes to learn more by collecting more close and exact matches from modern people of Western Europe. The better match, the more recent the common ancestor, Schultz said. But hoping to prove that they've gotten an ancestor in common with notoriously sickly boy King should take Igne's claims with a grain of salt, Putsch said.
He has sickle cell too.
Yeah, he said he has sickle cell.
Like,
So uh actually
the ethno-Somalians, they had their own sickle cell that came from Arabia.
yeah.
I mean, like the mere fact that they stole that data from the screen, I mean, that tells you that you're not dealing with
Yeah.
a whole organization. I mean, from the get go, it's suspect in my mind.
So they said so they was his haplogroup was J2, then they bring to R1B with it's so almost what 15 markers. They contaminate that man DNA.
Yeah, or like how do we even know if it's real?
Yeah, right.
So this is 2012, 2010. This is by
Yeah,
SOI Kiete.
that's Shamarka, yeah.
Yeah, let's go down to the actual DNA. So, if we zoom in, or how do I zoom in? So, SSA is sub-Saharan. I can't scroll. Oh, there we go. Sub-Saharan African. And we have Thoya at 93.4%. Yaya at 93. I want to go down to Totten Common, and he is at 93.9. So let's go back a little bit. I just want to move this lower bar though. But I
I'm
don't.
so impressed with all of this research that you've done.
Thank you. There we go. So move that, and I think it was here. So it says Cairo FP AFP Egyptian Antiques Supremo Zahi Hawes insisted Tuesday that Tutankhamun was not black despite calls by U.S. black activists to recognize the boy.
Yep.
King's dark skin color. Tutankhamun was not black, and the portrayal of ancient Egyptian civilization as black has no element of truth, has told reporters in 2007. Egyptians are not Arabs and are not Africans. Um,
So what Egypt was? I know
He's a
that,
fraud.
but
Hawass is a fraud.
all right, so
they
now
were Miss Egyptian, Black Egyptian.
yeah, I want to talk about the term black because the way I view the term black is not the same as so-called Eurocentrics. So so I wanna so when we say black, this is the first thing that comes to a Eurocentric's mind.
Man, to like Quarmentism, man, it was ridiculous.
Yeah, but Africa is so diverse that this is not accurate at all. When I say black, I mean blood. I don't mean what they look like. I mean black blood or African blood, or because I'm very into the DNA. So you see, the comparison here, this would be considered a black. His blood is native to the North Africa and East African region.
But they're gonna call him a Caucasoid.
Yeah, there's some studies that even call East Africans Caucasian.
How you would call them Caucasian, but they organs and they biology like disease and stuff, you know, natural.
Yeah. You know, it's too diverse
Yes.
to be calling one image black, you know?
Yes.
Um,
Totally agree with you, but I just want to say one thing. Careful about saying that it's about blood.
yeah.
Like when you use terms like haplogroup, like that's scientific. But if you say it's like black blood, what you're actually doing is repeating some old racist argument.
Okay.
Oh, like
So
the one.
rather than use the term blood, stick to things like haplogroup.
So they would think haplogroup like based on race, but it's not.
Yeah, right. No. So this is a conversation Shamarka and I have a lot, which is like, why are we using the term race in scientific work when we know that there's no scientific basis for our conceptions of race? And basically, his answer to me is there's not much you can do.
Someone needs to mute their mic, you know, it's messing up the whole flow. Sorry to be rude.
Quandric, mute your mic real quick. There you go. All right. What were you saying?
So anyway, I asked Shamarka why are we using the term race in scientific publications when we know there's no scientific basis for our ideas of race, right? Like your race isn't expressed, for instance, through your genome.
Yeah.
Even though, like, we talk about haplogroups coming from different regions of the world, but that doesn't equate to the racial categories we talk about today, for instance, in America. And yet we still see race used, like the word race used in scientific publications. And I asked Shamarka why are we doing that? And basically his answer to me is it's a problem and scientists know it's a problem, but like these words are used at the highest levels of science, you know, like the National Institutes of Health, the federal government, like research scientists are using these words, and it's sort of like everyone knows it's a problem, but yet we're all using these words. So
Yeah.
that's frustrating to me because I think it's important to use accurate terminology, but there it is.
Yeah. Because like when I was speaking with Karakuni, race wasn't even a thing. You know, you had people with DNA that stems from Asia. You know, DJ. Actually, don't have his file on here, but DJ, his DNA um, stemmed from South Asia, and then you had another mummy who was, you know, living during the reign of the native Egyptians whose DNA stemmed from Europe. And one thing, the problem is, shoot, I forgot what I was gonna say. But basically, it's kind of like tribal, you know. When you go to Africa, the not the the Dogon and the Khoisan aren't gonna be like they're not black or they're not white. They're gonna be like, oh, I'm Dogon and they're Khoisan, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else trying to join.
Yeah. Hey, I want to say I really like those pictures that you've assembled that you were showing a few minutes ago. I think that's a really effective presentation.
Thank you. I kind of want to go a little bit more into it though. So, let's see. I know DNA Tribes did one, but I kind of want to replace this with the actual documents from Soy Kiete and Zahi Hawes from 2012 and 2010 because just to look a little bit more credible. And yeah, these markers. So let's. Are you familiar with or have you like spoken with Zahi Hawes?
No. I know who he is. But no, I've been at like conferences that he's been at, but I've never like we're not buddies. I've never really spoken with him.
Okay. Um. So, do you think his claim in 2007 contradicts his study in 2012?
So, I mean, you are more knowledgeable about these studies of his than I am
Okay.
because I honestly haven't spent a lot of time looking at them. I've really been focusing on that 2017 one because his stuff that came out like in 2007 and later, I wasn't doing this work back then, so it sort of wasn't on my radar.
Hmm.
So tell me what's in this article and we'll talk about it.
So his article in. So he said in. Oh, wrong one. Wrong one again. So 2005 feels like they aren't black, they aren't African, and they aren't white European. They're not anything. So um his hold on my files. Document 2012. So he did a study in 2012 on Ramesses, and his DNA came out, native to the continent.
Mm-hmm.
And then he did another one that Soy Kiete went over. That is 2010, and he came out with these markers, including Tut, who he said wasn't black. So, do you think the 2007 claim contradicts his studies in 2010 and 12?
So this screen that we're looking at is Zahi Hawas's 2010, where he says King Tut is 93.9% SSA, right?
Yes, this is
This is Zahi Hawas's.
let me zoom out. It says 8 out of 13 pairs of STR from combined DNA index system were used by Hawes et al. Nevertheless, data suggests main sub-Saharan efficients of pharaonic mummies from the 18th and 20th dynasty.
Okay. Okay. So this is okay. This is Gordine and Kata's response to
Yes,
Zach's article. Okay. Okay. I mean, yeah, so this SOY Kata, that's Shamarka, right?
yes,
So this is like I have all the faith in the world in the scholarship that Shamarka does. Um,
yes.
so you know, whatever he publishes, I stand by.
Okay,
I can't speak to this data myself because I don't really know anything about genetics, but I totally stand behind Shamarka's work.
okay. I want to go to this link.
I gotta get headphones. Can you hang on
All
a
right.
second?
Yep.
I'll be back in just a sec. Sorry. Let me plug in my headphones. Okay, go ahead.
All right, so basically, Kemetyu took the markers from Haha's study and put them in the I forget the process is called, but you take the markers, you put them in digitally, and they come out with a haplogroup um and SSA markers,
Okay.
and this is what they came out to.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, this response is a I believe the reason Hahas didn't respond to this the
Mm-hmm.
same way he responded to the 2011 IGNE study
Mm-hmm.
is because this is irrefutable right here.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, he contradicted himself by releasing this study. So I want to get into pre-dynastic Egypt.
Okay.
Um, let's see. Three pre-dynastic mummies traced back to West Africa. Um, I'm gonna try to summarize this. Use of amplified reflectory mutation system ARMS in the study of HBS in pre-dynastic Egyptian remains. We conducted a molecular investigation of the presence of sickle cell anemia or sickle in six pre-dynastic Egyptian mummies about 3,200 BC from the anthropological Ethnographic Museum of Turin. Previous studies of these remains show presence of severe anemia. So after I read this, I immediately went and researched who these traits are predominantly in: anemia, sickle cell, and um, sickle cell
Mm-hmm.
anemia by the RBCs. Sickle cell anemia seems to have targeted a certain race. About 93, 98 of the affected people are African American.
Mm-hmm.
Researchers believe that the reason why African Americans are more affected the most is because of malaria epidemic that occurs in Africa. I believe there are some mummies who were found with, you know, malaria,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a lot of mummies found with sickle cell anemia, and what was the other one? Um, yeah, sickle cell anemia, and there was another one I forgot. But I wouldn't say West African. I'd just say Africa. But
Makes sense to me.
yeah, are you familiar with the ginger mummy?
The ginger mummy. No.
Oh yeah, we have about 10 people in here. So, yeah, in conclusion, modern DNA analysis have proven ancient royalty. I say royalty because we don't have, the DNA samples of, citizens and all that. But
Mhm.
to be of African, I gotta change a lot of this. Um, background and gene pool.
Yeah.
Um, now, I can't really explain this. Um, you have to be like familiar with haplogroups, or if
Mm-hmm.
if you are, but basically, there's a controversy where this haplogroup right here is an East African haplogroup, and Eurocentrics. It's called the father Eurasian atom because this is the first. This is the father of the out of African haplogroups.
Okay.
So this is East African. I want to show it on the map. So this originated over here, the Eurasian atom. But since it's called Eurasian atom, Eurocentrics believe it started in Eurasia and then spread
Uh-huh.
over here. So that's the misconception they get. And that's why they believe, because the mummy of Ramesses, his atom is the Eurasian atom. And this is where it comes from. So they believe they believe his DNA is from Eurasia, and Eurasians traveled all the way down to here into Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the misconception they get of this. Yeah, it splits off. D goes to Asia, and E, Ethiopia, East Africa, 70 KYA, and all that good stuff. This just explains how they found the E haplogroup in Nigerians. So closely relates Nigerians to the ancients, or their haplogroup to them.
Mm-hmm.
Um. All right. So how
So
did
what part of Nigeria?
part of Nigeria? Let me see. I don't want to move nothing around. Okay. A 2019 study by Haber et al. Supports an African origin for the haplogroup E based on analysis of the Y chromosome, uh, phylogenetic structure, haplogroup. What part of Nigeria? Haplogroup DO found in 3 Nigerians, an additional branch of DE lineage deriving early from the D branch. So it doesn't pinpoint like where exactly in Nigeria, but it says 3 Nigerians he did a test on have the same haplogroup. Now, how did ancient Greeks describe Egyptians? Now, a lot of the say Afrocentrics like to use Herodotus. I don't really like to use Herodotus because he talked about giant ants in the Middle East. and, and he's not very credible to me. But there are some others. The full quote from Herodotus: "For the fact is, as soon came to realize myself, and then heard from the others later, that the Colchians are obviously Egyptian. When the notion occurred to me, I asked both the Colchians and the Egyptians about it, and found that the Colchians had better recall of the Egyptians than the Egyptians did of them. Some Egyptians said that they thought the Colchians originated with Sesostris' army, but I myself guessed their Egyptian origin, not only because the Colchians of their dark skinned and curly hair, which a lot of people like to use as a proof to claim they were black, um, which does not count for much by itself, because these features are common in others too, but more importantly because Colchians, Egyptians, and Ethiopians are the only people in the world who practice circumcision and who have always done so." Um, yeah. Uh, so Herodotus didn't say Egyptians looked like black African. He actually said they looked like people in Georgia. Now, this is another quote. Manilius Ostromica, and that's the page. "The appearance of the inhabitants is also not very different in India and Ethiopia. The southern Indians are rather more like Ethiopians, as they are black to look on, and their hair is black, only they are not so snub nosed or woolly haired as the Ethiopians. The northern Indians are most like the Egyptians physically." So the southern, it's kind of a difference too in India, where you have the darker side and the lighter side. But as I showed, you got a darker side of Africa and a lighter side of Africa, and they're all um native haplogroups to the continent. So, Aryan Indica, page chapter. As for the people of India, those in the south are like Ethiopians in color. Now, if you look at an older map, Ethiopia is basically half of Africa. So that includes Egypt, Sudan. So he was basically saying they all look the same as the Indians in the south of India. Although they are like the rest in respect to countenance and hair, for on account of the humidity of their hair does not curl. There is those in the north are like the Egyptians. So we have a few more. This is the last one right here. Black people reside not in the Nile Valley, but in far land by the fountains of the sun. So they're talking about eastern, but not northern. Xenophians. Um, the men of Egypt are mostly brown and black with skinny, desiccated look. Now, so the evidence suggests Egyptians look like Georgians and the Pakistans, formerly northern India area. Now, here's my revelation. I want to explain to you all that these Greek historians were not describing the ancient Egyptians; they were describing the Persians. Spencer Whiteman, um, another scholar I spoke to. Um, so this is a timeline, so you have to probably remember before we go to the next page. Around 671 BC, Assyrians invaded Egypt. Around 502 BC, Persians had already conquered Egypt. They were in the land. Um, Herodotus was born in 485 BC. That's after. Arian was born 992 AD. That's after. Marcus Millennius was born 1st AD, 60 BC, and 570 BC. So this was all after invasions of said foreigners. But he's the oldest, so remember his quote was brown and black. So this was before the Persian invasion. So if you wanted to use any quote from a Greek scholar, he would be the best one. The best one would be the oldest one, but still his is not accurate because it was after the Assyrian invasion. Um, by the time these men were up in age, they were witnessing Persians in Egypt, describing them to look like North Indians. Most ancient Egyptians and Kushite uh, African people were pushed down south after Assyrians attacked, where they fled and settled in present day Morocco, Sudan, in 656 BC, where the Egypto-Kushite culture thrived for 1,000 years. The Meroitic language used hieroglyphics just like the ancient Egyptians until hieroglyphic writing became extinct in 480. Spencer Whiteman. Now, I don't know how accurate he is on this pushback, but it's pretty, makes sense to me. This is just more in detail of the pushback, but 400 BC, birth between Sudan and southern Egypt, which I kind of disagree with because I've read I just read another article where they were talking about the Red Pyramid having water damage from a river that was 13,000 years old. So if it had water damage from a 13,000-year-old river, that will make Egypt much older than what Egyptologists say it is. So I will have to study that more though. But between Sudan and southern Egypt, the very first dynasty, which will eventually conquer the whole north around 3,300 BC, from 3,300 BC to 7,030 BC. Rule only these dynasties originating from southern Egypt and Sudan. Between 730 BC and 1540 BC, a dynasty of invaders called Hyksos, probably non-African, conquered the north of Egypt. The indigenous kings withdrew to their original bastion, the south. Another, I guess, clue of origination in the south is the Valley of the Kings, which everybody always buries their self in the south of. One sec. Whose mic is that? Uh, politically B. Can you mute your mic? All right. Bonus quote. They say also that the Egyptians were colonists sent out by the Ethiopians, Osiris having been the leader of the colony, Theodorus Siculus, 90 BC. In conclusion, none of these Greek historians have ever lived during the reign of the original Egyptians, so they're not as reliable as your historians want you to think.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Geography. Now, the pyramids begin in the south. All the imperfections are in the south. Sarah, Sut, and Seti. On this list, you see all the imperfections, all the starts, all the mess ups are in the south until they get perfect towards the end. With every pyramid. Now the districts as well. This is from Sarah, Sut, and Seti. Start from the south and out into the mouth of the Nile. These are the nomes. Now, the river, the Nile, it floats from south to north. This is Lake Tana from Ethiopia. Lake Tana, this is Lake Tana. This lake flows from south to north out of Ethiopia. This is also where the DE and the E haplogroup originate. Lake Victoria out of Uganda floats south. It connects with Ethiopia. Lake Victoria. This is Lake Victoria, criminally renamed because it was named something else, but they renamed it. This lake flows from the south to the north out of Uganda. This lake joins with the White Nile, which joins with the Blue Nile, which comes from Lake Tana. These two lakes and rivers conjoin and create the Nile Valley. And the lake flows. The Nile is a major north-flowing river in the northern eastern Africa and is the longest river in Africa and the disputed longest river in the world, as the Brazilian government says that the Amazon River is longer than the Nile. The Nile is about 6,650 6,650 kilometers. I don't know. I use miles, so 4,130 miles long, and the drainage basin covers the 11 countries: Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Kenya, Ethiopia, Eritrea, South Sudan, Republic of the Sudan, and Egypt. In particular, the Nile is the primary water source of Egypt. And this coincides with Theodorus Siculus' statement that they come from the south because all these lakes flow southward. Now my question, are you familiar with Ta Seti?
In what way?
Like as the origin or the the first tribe, like a tribe, the first tribe of where these people come from and flow down into the northern end of the Nile.
Okay, so I've heard this. I've heard of this theory. I'm not super familiar with it.
Yeah. What about Punt?
Yes. Now Punt, I know something about.
Okay. Let me see. Alex, you can't, you still in school or nah?
Yeah, I'm in school.
All right. So I don't know too much about the Punt thing. I actually just started getting into it, but I was told that there's a papyri that says something about Punt being their homeland, and I'm not too sure about that.
Being the homeland of Egyptians?
Yes.
I don't know about that. It could exist. I just don't know about it. What I'm familiar with Punt from are scenes on a wall of a temple in Egypt, because you probably know Hatshepsut, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know Hatshepsut sent a trade expedition to Punt.
Yes.
Okay, so I know about it from her depiction of that land on the wall of her temple.
Okay. And I believe Karkunishi was like they meant it in like a spiritual form, like Punt was the motherland and it spit out the Nile, and I'm not too sure of it, but that's what I've been hearing.
Yeah, that's an interpretation. We can't say exactly what they meant, right? Because we don't know, but that's a thought.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, you got it.
Well, I just like the amount of material you've drawn together is so amazing to me, because you're covering so many different bases, right? Like you're doing the classical authors, you're doing, genetics, it's, now you're getting into punts, which could involve art if you wanted it to. It's pretty awesome what you're doing. The pyramids, I was saying in the chat, and Akhenaten and Ra was agreeing with me, that the burial mounds in Sudan are thought to be like the precursors of pyramids. And so, they're older and they're coming from the south. So that's a piece of evidence. There's also evidence in here. I'm going to put this in the chat again. I don't work a whole lot with ceramics, but I know other people who work with ceramics, and this wavy line pottery also originates like in Sudan and seems to spread north into Egypt. So again, it's evidence for an earlier set of cultures further south in Africa whose culture is spreading north. There's also, there was something else. What was it? The tumuli, the wavy line pottery. Oh shoot, there's a third thing and I've forgotten what I was going to tell you. But anyway, there are other pieces of information that support the argument that you're making.
Yeah. Now you mentioned Sheikh Diop, and let me see.
Do you know the site Nabta Playa?
No.
That's something to look at. It's cool. I've never been there personally, but I saw it in a special. I think the special was a UK special, and then I started like looking at it online. It's very, very ancient, and it's like almost like Stonehenge in a way, in terms of they think it had astronomical uses, but also there's like this area of it, because it's an enormous site, this area of it where there are rocks that you can play as if they're an instrument. And so in the UK special that I saw, they were playing these rocks. It was amazing.
Yeah, I have to look into that. But But you mentioned Sheikh Anta Diop. Are you familiar with his melanin study?
So yes and no. He did so much work, and I am not familiar with like nearly all of his work because he published so much. But like I'm familiar with bits and pieces of his work.
Okay. Now I got a few questions from Instagram. I'm gonna pull them up. If you guys have questions, you could put them in the chat, but I'm gonna pull up these questions from Instagram. So one question from Aaliyah: what motivated or influenced Miss Vanessa Davies to have a career in Egyptology?
Hmm. It started with I wanted to learn Arabic because of my mother. My mother spoke Arabic and she never taught us, and it annoyed me. And so I started learning Arabic when I went to college, and the best place to learn a foreign language is to go where people speak that language. And so I did a study abroad program in Cairo. This was in the early 90s, and I fell in love with Egypt. I think Egypt is, I mean, I'm from a really small town I grew up in Pennsylvania, in north central Pennsylvania. The town I grew up in had like 3,000 people in it. And so to go to Cairo, it blew my mind. I loved it. I'd never seen anything like it. And I just wanted to do whatever I could do to like keep having to go to Cairo. And so I actually started doing Islamic studies because the college I was at didn't do any ancient Egypt. So I did modern Egypt and the modern Middle East. And then I was able to get into this PhD program at Chicago to do ancient Egypt. But I hadn't really done much on ancient Egypt before that PhD program.
Okay. Oh, Akin wanted to go back to Ptolemy.
Oh yeah. Ptolemy the first and the second, which is not a whole lot that I know about. Let me see. Can you talk about why Ptolemy first shut down the temples along the Nile? Because they didn't want to accept
Turn your mic on.
Christos, who was a god in the image of Ptolemy. Have you read Greek is Hebrew with a veil?
Yeah, that's your old, I can't remember his surname, Sorry about the feedback.
Yeah, sorry. It was hard to hear you. I didn't catch the beginning of what you said.
Trying to find a way around the feedback.
Yeah.
Just a sec.
Sure. Unfortunately, the Ptolemies are not like my area of expertise. So it's really hard for me to talk about like why they shut down the temples because I don't know a whole lot of, like I work on earlier Egyptian history, so more New Kingdom. So like Hatshepsut, King Tut, that era is really my specialty, Ramses, but not the Ptolemies. So I can't say a lot about why they shut the temples. In fact, I wasn't aware of a large scale shutting of the temples that they did because I know there are so many Ptolemaic temples in Egypt. So like I'm familiar with them building a lot of temples or adding on to temples that were already there. So
Yeah,
I'm
there's
sorry.
a school of, hopefully this is more better. There's a school of thought, and I'm trying to find the origin of the source, where they say basically Serapis Christos was invented by Ptolemy first because he was trying to obviously merge the Macedonians that were coming in with the natives. From there, they were kind of like, look, we're not really going to accept this, even though the concepts that you're pushing are really nice. We can't really accept this created thing. And the story goes that basically he says, look, either we do this, or I'm going to go up and down the Nile, shut down all of the schools, take all of the information that you have, and you're just gonna have to live with that. So they was like, okay, well, we don't really feel you're gonna pull that hand because it's not going to really be favorable, and potentially, or should I say, in actuality, he did it. And then this is the concept behind where we actually got the information from for the Library of Alexandria, or the Serapeum. But
Huh.
I'm trying to find the source because that's a story that's been given to me, which kind of makes a lot of sense because these people are warring people. To me, they didn't really seem like they had that much technology because they didn't really keep that much history of past events for my awareness. So from there, then obviously, as you know, the Serapeum then got turned into the museum, then turned into the Library of Alexandria. So with that awareness, you kind of can kind of see that that data came from the data that's in the library came from somewhere. But I'm just trying to find out, okay, well, who's got that information so I can add that to my library of information.
Yeah. No, I wish I could help you track down that story, but I'm totally unfamiliar with it. What I can tell you is that Egyptian temples typically did have their own, we might think of it as a library, like a
Cache
body
of
of
history.
texts, right, that they preserved. We know this because we know of references to these areas. Unfortunately, a lot of them didn't survive, but we have clues that preserving texts were important to them. So, like for instance, there's one particular official's tomb that happened to have a lot of literature in it. Like he had himself buried with a bunch of literature. And so that's how we know some of the like sort of tales and myths of Egypt is from this one person's tomb. It just so happened his text survived. And certainly they kept a lot of administrative records which have survived. So from the like palaces at Amarna, there was a tremendous amount of administrative records that were kept, including like correspondences with foreign rulers, and all sorts of like legal documents just for like regular old people, like inheritance documents and divorce type documents, like if our marriage breaks up, then my kids are gonna get money, that sort of thing. So like to my mind, I wouldn't say like the Library at Alexandria was the first. It's certainly one that like attracted a lot of attention from like classical authors who wrote about it, but there's
Can I
good
segue in and show you why I'm following that rule of thought?
Sure.
Sorry to be rude, apologies, humble apologies. The concept itself leads into, and it was one of the first questions I asked before Rova started about the haplogroups with regards to why you was talking about racism in classical antiquity up until now, especially the area that you was talking about, the 1900s. Have you read Black Athena?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have, then you can harmonize with me. I'm trying to understand why these people are doing this and dismantle what they've done to kind of show that, look, with the exception of the data that you're given to us, you're not really showing the true author. So that question that I answered initially was to kind of give me that the linchpin, or at least a big, thumbtack to say, okay, this is where we're going to start, and then this is how we move forward. Because there's another theory with regards to Genesis. As you know, the Septuagint was added to the library. If you look at Genesis 1 and 2, it carries a lot of hallmarks from the Ugdod theology. I don't know if you know about. Yeah, exactly. So if that links into that, and at the same time, the concepts that all of the mystery schools started with, which was basically, I am the son of a god. My ancestors were sons of God, therefore I can make myself a king and a god. And then the mystery system came through via that method. My kind of perspective is basically, and it sounds a bit far-fetched. If there's anybody here from different faiths, please bear with me. I'm thinking that the whole bloodline of Solomon, Abraham, and all of those people is Ptolemy. And at the same time, he created this mystery system to copy the same method that Neferkari Shabaka used when he created Ptah. But I need to piece it all together. I know you can, because your face, I know you with me. A lot of people are like, what's he on about? But because your face changed, I know you can see where I'm coming from with the concept.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting idea. I've never heard anything like it, and I think it's a really interesting thought to pursue.
Yeah. So yeah, I think with regards to Black Athena, that kind of links into what you're talking about with regards to the racial side of things.
Yeah.
Helena Blavatsky mainly, as well as the Rosicrucian author, I think his name was Mark Heinrich, if my memory is correct. Mark Hines. Obviously, he had the romantic theology concepts as well as the Hellenomania concepts. And then from there, then the Aryan concepts, which goes back into one of the slides earlier where it was talking about the Eurasian man. Even though he came from Africa, he's got nothing to do with Europe or Asia. All of these things kind of lead back lexiconically to a out of Africa perspective, even down to them saying that the steppe people from the Yamna tribe came into India and obviously gave them the Vedas, which then, as you know, creates the caste system.
Yeah. I mean, so Black Athena, just in case some of you don't know, when the book came out, which I think was in the late 80s, maybe, it was really controversial in the field of classics and in Egyptology, and there was a big backlash. And so there is a whole book that is like scholars' responses to Black Athena, where they're arguing against it. And then I think there was a response to that book. So like this went on for, a decade and a half or more. And it's not something that scholars today typically talk about. Like, they're sort of like, okay, that was in our past, we've moved on. Which, like, I get that maybe you don't want to rehash arguments that you were going over 25 or 30 years ago, but that doesn't mean that, like, we're not racist anymore, right? That's my take on it anyway.
No, you're right, because the whole, like you said, they've just tried to put out as much body of work as possible to then say, okay, well, yeah, we've dealt with that, as opposed to actually dealing with, like you say, the actual issue of racism in academia, even down to the words of, like he says earlier, black, white, whoever looks like this is the origin or the psychogenesis of these concepts, when in actuality, like he says, they weren't really defining themselves like that back then. It wasn't really looked at in that perspective, although I've got me and my partner, we're basically trying to break stuff down. I've been looking into the Greek word for Gentile, and we realized that it actually means ethnos, as in ethnicity, or the ethnicities. So when you're talking about those that were circumcised and uncircumcised, those that were circumcised belong to like a secret cult, so to speak. Therefore, those from the outside that never had the snip, so to speak, weren't allowed to get the sacred knowledge. The actual Christianity text itself allows those from the outside to get that information. So therefore, then, where was racism going on back then, but in a different format?
Yeah, right,
if you snipped it, okay. If you're not snipped, which is what the Jews do. This is where I'm coming from. So they're carrying on that tradition, but the first time we hear of the Jews is in the Septuagint,
right?
Which then goes back to Ptolemy, which goes back to you guys weren't doing the snipping when you came, because you're Macedonians, you weren't doing the snipping. Only the Egyptians were doing the snipping, as mentioned earlier. So this one coming from, from my perspective, they created this mystery system, Christianity, had probably a little argument with the Seleucids over in the Levant, annexed that area to say, okay, you guys sit there, gave them this information over years and years and years. As you know, generations, they'll believe it. And now we've got this problem. This problem actually leads into Hitler's problem, because Hitler had the same issue with regards to fuel and his where do we come from as a German race kind of problem, which then obviously led into him trying to destroy the Abrahamic faith so then he can have his, I can't remember the German name for it, but he had a religion that was saying that the black people or the darker races are reincarnations of bad people.
The
Aryan race, yeah. But they gave it a different name. I think it was called Thule, Thule, where they were saying that basically Helena Blavatsky, this is the reason why I mentioned these names earlier, they was pushing this. And this is where, from my perspective, the racism all started, because I think someone figured out, you know what, spirituality came from the Africans, and we actually enslaved them. Oops, how can we make it so that our descendants don't feel that kind of, oh, sorry. How can we make these guys be the bad guys, so to speak?
Yeah.
I'm waffling, but I'm just trying to cover off a few points. But because you've answered that question by saying you weren't too sure, I'm just trying to harmonize with you just to see what you do know. See if I'm going in the right direction with some of my theories, and then from there just add on to other stuff that people may not be aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah, bombarded you with a lot of stuff.
No, I mean, you've given me a lot to think about.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting avenue you're going down. I just wish I had some knowledge to offer you to help you out, but I don't.
In time. My whole angle initially started with astrology. So I was trying to, as a class on my own, try and understand, okay, well, where did astrology come from?
Uh-huh.
To then realize it was the Chalcedons as well as the Babylonians.
Yeah.
They had a body of work. And then you've got this old thing, what's his name now? Dorotheus of Sidon, where
Mhm.
he had a thing called the Pentateuch. And I was thinking, well, hang on, though, how come he's got a Pentateuch and then there's another Pentateuch? That doesn't really make any sense. To then realize that there's a thing called Project Hindsight, which is a total different perspective on astrology. To then realize that astrology was a thing back then.
Yeah.
The Egyptians used to have days, calendar days of good days, calendar days of bad days.
Totally.
To then take it forward to say, okay, well, why is the moon nurturing? To then realize that you had Luna, Juno, Diana, Hecate, and then the Egyptians had Hecat, which was part of the Agdod.
Yep.
And then from there, then I've realized now that the deity Asa, also known as Osiris, was linked to Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me take you slightly left. If you look at the papyrus of Annie,
Mhm.
the death scene, Annie has to go through the 12 gates,
Mhm.
which to me would be the 12 constellations. He would then sit just in front of Hermes,
Uh-huh.
which is generally ruled by Gemini.
Okay.
The next constellation across now would be Cancer, which as the signs were progressing, because the sign of Cancer wasn't always a crab, it used to be a crocodile.
Okay.
Yeah, so as you know, Amit's a crocodile.
Yeah.
Yeah, your heart gets devoured, you get the second death.
Mhm.
If your heart's okay, you move across then to Leo, who's the sun, ruled by Ra. Ra would then take you up to Osiris, but Osiris is directly opposite Leo in Aquarius, as in Saturn. Have I lost you? Am I with you?
No, I'm with you.
No. So from my perspective, when they talk about the seven heavens, I think they try to, apologies if there's any kids here, bastardize that perspective. Because as you know, the top heaven would belong to Saturn. Saturn's got the highest and the oldest kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Cyclinic period around the sun. I think it takes about 30 years, 28
Mhm.
years to do a full return. So my angle was basically, did they use this to try and get away from the veneration of Osiris, but then those that were dealing with the Hermetic texts, as well as the seven heavens, as well as Plato, Aristotle, those guys. I mean, if you look at the myth of he talks about the seven heavens,
Mhm.
and the top heaven was with, the one that resurrects you to bring you
Mhm.
back down. Osiris has that the epithet of resurrection.
Mhm.
So I was just looking at it from that angle, which then led me into the Black Athena book to then make
Mhm.
me realize, oh, okay, there's a lot of racial stuff going on.
Yeah.
I need to try and find out where these guys got their text from, because a lot of the text itself was stolen from different nations, but now we've got it linked into Western theology. And to me, I don't really think, no disrespect to them, but they were warring people. If it comes to killing people and tactical warfare and how to break a man's neck and destroy their crops and just be destructive, I'll give you that. That's great. But with regards to saving souls, and I don't really think they created the Vedas. I can't see it, especially when Sanskrit was developed in South India, not North. All
Mhm.
of the Sanskrit text and everything is South India.
Mhm.
It's all racial. But I'm gonna come off the soapbox.
Well, thank you for all of that. I appreciate it. You've taught me a lot. But do you think, King, should we do some of the questions in the chat? Because I gotta go pretty soon because my dinner's being made. That's why I had to put on headphones.
All right. Yeah, I was trying to take notes. um, do you know anything about the first dynasty, Old Kingdom,
Yeah.
Egyptologist, starting from the first recognized pharaoh, Menyana or Menes Narmar?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where he came from. That is such a good question. So, I mean, yeah, I know about Narmer or Menes, as he's can be called in different sources. There. You probably know Denzel, the Narmer palette, because it's pretty famous. Um, there's a mace head also that he's on, and mace heads are another thing, by the way, that appear in like Southern Nile River Valley before they appear in Egypt along the Nile. So that's another place to look for the older populations of the southern part of the Nile River Valley. Anyway, back to Narmer. Where did he come from and what population group did he belong to is a question I can't answer with certainty. I don't know that anyone can answer it with certainty. As far as I'm aware, we don't have hard and fast evidence that tells us. I mean, we know he was ruling in southern Egypt, and it seems like he conquered northern Egypt and sort of, like unified that section of the Nile River Valley. Whether or not he came from further south in Africa, I don't know that we have any evidence that tells us definitively. So that's not very satisfying, I know.
Cool. No, yeah, that was good. But Menya. So I was doing some research on my own as well, and I was finding out like I read a paper that kind of correlated Nile River people, so Nile Valley civilizations, to the Egyptians, and one of the peoples or like tribes that lived there, ethnic nations, were Luo, which is where my family come from. And Menya is a Luo name that's still being used and it's very common. So obviously, like with in terms of names of the ancients, they get changed a lot, obviously from like translation,
Yeah.
and then different region. That's where Menes came from, like Greek, and then Neymar's a lot later as well.
Yep. Well,
Yeah.
Narmer is what we think we're seeing in the hieroglyphs, because it's only two signs, right? And the way we think that they're read is Nar and Mer, but we don't know exactly what the vowels are because they only wrote the consonants. But yeah, and so Menes is for sure like a sort of Greekified version, and what we're seeing in the Egyptian that comes out as Menes is just MN. And like, how do you pronounce MN? Like we just guess and we say like men, but we don't actually know how it was pronounced in terms of like what the vowels were. But so tell me this, you said Lua, is that like Lua?
It's Luo, so Luo.
Luo, okay.
They come from, well, they're currently based in Kenya, so around the Lake Victoria region. They traveled down from the Nile. So a lot of through like traditions, so like grandparents tell stories to kids. So there are a lot of them, like they say they traveled from South Sudan, which is the mainstream narrative that you'll find everywhere. But you can talk to the elders of the community of the Luo ethnic nation, and they said that they actually came from Egypt, which was very interesting.
That's awesome. I have not heard that, and I love it.
I think I'll try and find the paper and I'll share it on the chat.
That would be fantastic. And if you can't find it before our call is done, maybe King can email it to me, or you can email it to me or whatever, because I'd love to see it.
Yeah. Another question, is Moses based off Akhenaten?
Okay, so that is a good question. There is someone, an Egyptologist, who has written a lot about this. I'll put his name in the chat. He is he German or Austrian? I forget. I think he's German. So his name is Jan Osman, and he's written a lot about this. He does see a connection between the biblical story of Moses and the Egyptian figure of Akhenaten. I don't think he equates them as the same person, but he does see, let's say, some cultural crossovers, and he wonders if the biblical story of Moses was inspired by people who lived in Egypt, whether they were Egyptians or people we might refer to as Hebrews. I don't think he specifies that, but if that story was inspired by people who lived in Egypt around the reign of Akhenaten and were familiar with some of the sort of religious concepts that Akhenaten was promoting, the one thing I would say about that is sometimes what you read in like on the internet about Akhenaten might say that he was like a monotheist. And that's not exactly correct, I wouldn't say, because monotheist is someone who believes in one deity, right? And that's not exactly what Akhenaten was doing.
Yeah.
So there's that, but maybe that's splitting hairs, maybe that's being too specific. There are other crossovers besides that particular one, but that's like the big one most people point to.
One question I have is, wait, what was the question? Hold on. Wow, I just forgot my question.
Let me see what.
Hold on. It was a very good one. I might have it in my notes. But somebody asked, what do you think about Hollywood's portrayal of Egypt?
I mean, mostly it stinks, right? I mean, this most recent Cleopatra movie is a missed opportunity for casting Cleopatra. It seems like it would have been really great if they had cast an actress who was of mixed race, because as best as we can tell of Cleopatra, that's what her ethnic makeup was.
Yeah.
So
Can I be rude and just quickly humbly jump in? Wasn't she though linked to Ptolemy's dynasty, and they were doing that brother sister brother sister brother? So where would a black person or an African come in when they was keeping it brother sister
I
brother sister?
think her mother was Nubian.
So there are two
Bernice.
possibilities. We're not exactly sure who her mother is, but she is thought to have been an Egyptian, and her grandmother, her father's mother is also thought to have been an Egyptian. So there's two possibilities there, and then on top of that is the fact that her family, I mean, historically is of Macedonian descent, had lived in Egypt for 300 years and were presenting themselves as Egyptian rulers, right? In terms of like the art, in terms of the iconography, building more temples in Egypt, continuing the Egyptian religion, all of these things, they were presenting themselves as Egyptians, even though, they had a lot of Macedonian heritage, but they also seemingly had Egyptian heritage.
I get that, but I've just, and apologies for hijacking, I'm just adding on to the question. From my perspective, because of Ptolemy's first directive in itself of, hey, we're going to take these people over, let's keep it in the family, with the exception of, what's his name? The father lover, Philopater.
Yeah, exactly.
Philopater, yeah. I think tell a lie. Philadelphus. I think Philadelphus was the only one that broke protocol with regards to having harem and stuff like that. But I would need you to help me find out which Ptolemy broke line and says, okay, I'm going to have a girl or a partner of Nubian stock. If you can give me that, that's cool. I can work with that concept. But from my perspective and from what I've read, it's incest all the way down to Cleo, where she then decided, you know what, I'm going with you, Mark.
Her father had a nickname that was, I mean, he had a few different nicknames, but one of his nicknames was illegitimate. And
Sorry, Stella. Carry on. This is good. Illegitimate, yeah?
Yeah, so that is one of the many reasons that we don't think that his mother was the sister of the brother-sister marriage who were his parents.
So this is Cleo 10, if my memory is correct. Cleo 11?
Because the last Cleopatra was 7.
7, okay.
Yeah.
So this is Cleo 8 we're talking.
No.
Cleo 7.
Cleo 7, yeah.
Thank you, thank you. Because everybody's like Cleo's this, and I think, nah, there was under incest heavy. Like, yeah.
I
How
mean,
you doing, sis? I love you, sis.
there was there was a lot of incest. You're right.
Another question I have is, what do you think about the different, ideas of how the more spiritual dynasties were ran? Like some people favor towards like, oh, it was a, um, dominant, like how America is today. You have elites and stuff, and the elites treat the working class like a different, worse way. And there's some people who are like, no, they live by the 42 laws of Mayat.
Mhm.
So your interpretation on that, because I know Karakuni, she's more on the it was kind of like, elites, and then the elites treated the lower class. But
I mean, I'm sort of two minds, because I'm, on the one hand, I want to be an idealist about it and say, yes, we had these laws of how you behave towards other people. And clearly those laws were important because they're putting them up on the walls of their tomb, right? This is like the guiding rule for what happens to you when you die. You're judged according to them. So I do believe those laws were important, and I want to believe that most people acted in accord with them. But in my heart, I think that they were as complex a group of people as any of us are today. And so some of them were probably enormous jerks to other people, and some probably did try to, treat other people well. I mean, you can't deny that there was a huge wealth differential between the elite and the non-elite. Um, so that's an issue if you care about distribution of wealth. I mean, it simply didn't exist then. Does that necessarily mean that the wealthy people treated non-wealthy people awfully, like in terms of, just disrespecting them as human beings? I don't think it has to, any more than it has to in our societies, right? Some wealthy people treat non-wealthy people fine, some don't. I I tend to think they weren't that much different from us in being that complex.
all right, another question. I'm just gonna do rapid fire questions.
Okay, because I got to go eat dinner soon.
All right, another question is, um, do you think Egypt created the wheel before Mesopotamia?
The wheel?
Yes.
I don't know when the wheel showed up in Mesopotamia. Um, so I don't know. I mean, sorry.
Okay. Another question. Medical tools. Do you think those are
Yes.
based? Okay.
Do I think what? They're based in Egypt?
Yes, based off of Egypt.
Okay, so this I actually can talk to you a lot about. First of all, the ancient Egyptians were renowned in the ancient world for being skilled in medicine. And we have medical texts that have survived. I've read some of them. They're super interesting to me. Some are like kind of books of how to treat people, like if you see that his head has been gashed open, this is what you should do for him, like that kind of thing. They're like telling you what to do for your patient. And sometimes the treatment, was nothing more than like make him comfortable and let him rest, because like there's not much we can do for this person, which is a great thing, right? It's better than like sticking leeches on someone and have them suck their blood out like they did in medieval Europe.
Yeah.
But on top of that, they did surgery, and they were renowned for doing surgery. And we have some of those texts as well that talk about like drilling into the brain to release pressure if there's been like swelling there. And they did dentistry. So like they were super advanced in terms of their medical skill in the ancient world. And the thought is that they were so good at this because they were very familiar with how the body worked because of preserving bodies through mummification, right? Like, how they pulled out internal organs and dried the body and all that. And so our thought, our guess is like because of that intimate contact with the body after death, this gave them an understanding of what was inside of bodies, and it, and this is through this knowledge they developed their medical practices.
Now, there are some depictions of them being agriculturals, but there's also blogs that say they were vegetarian, or studies that say they were vegetarians. So would that be true?
Okay, so both, right? I mean, your average person who was not an elite person, who did not have access to wealth, was not eating a ton of meat from what we can tell. Now, they weren't like vegetarian because of like a moral decision that they were making, but simply they just ate a lot of like bread and beer, and I mean that was the staple of the diet, right? Meat, in terms of animal meat, not fish meat, because fish, were pretty prevalent in the Nile. You could get that relatively easily, and birds you could get relatively easily. But like animal meat, like say cows, like hefty beef type meat, seems to have been distributed to average people through festivals in temples. And those don't happen all the time, right? So maybe every couple of months or something.
Yeah,
your
I heard they
average-
eat it like how we eat cake on birthdays and holidays and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Exactly.
Another question is, hold on, I had a lot of questions. Plumbing. Do you believe they created plumbing first, or was that a Roman thing?
Plumbing.
Yes.
So, yeah, no, they not plumbing in terms of like,
Not like pressured plumbing, but
yeah. I mean, they had irrigation, right? Which is like kind of plumbing in a way. It's like plumbing for your fields.
yeah.
So they were very skilled with irrigation. But in terms of like plumbing for your house, the only thing I've seen that in any way gives me any clue was in a palace. So like it's not your average person, right? It's the king. But there's a particular room that they've identified as like a quote unquote shower. But what happened, they think, was that people poured water over the king in this room. And there did seem to be a system to drain the water away, but there didn't seem to be a system to bring the water in. So less plumbing, more drainage, I guess.
What do you think about them putting gold in their water?
Gold?
Yes.
I have not heard that.
Yeah, I think it's called something water, but it's to boost, DNA, or, increase health benefits. Yeah. Um, what else? Their relationship with Kush. How is that?
Okay, so that's complex because we don't have written records from that area early in Egyptian history. So when what we call the Old Kingdom in Egypt, we don't have written records from that time period in Kush. So that stinks, right? Because we don't have their perspective on their relationship. Same for like the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, like no written records from Sudan. We have archaeological evidence, but you kind of have to guess with what you're seeing there, right? You don't have written texts. What I can say in general is that their relationship changed over time, right? I mean, we're talking thousands of years. So there were times when, Egyptians were trading with the people in modern Sudan. There were times when they were conquering them. So it varied depending on who was in control, right? I mean, you all probably know the 25th dynasty of Egypt is a dynasty that originated in Sudan and came north and conquered Egypt. So back and forth, it varied. In terms of average people, we know that Egyptians lived in Sudan. We know that Nubians or people from Sudan lived in Egypt. We have records of their names. We have records of them, like for instance, marrying an Egyptian woman, this sort of thing. So like on an average person level, they lived in each other's societies, but like on a state level, it might be war, it might be trading, it kind of depends on the era.
How do you feel about certain tribes? This goes for like all artifacts or all areas. What do you feel about tribes asking for artifacts back stolen from by the French and by the British?
I think, I mean, I'm totally in favor of artifacts being in the place that the artifacts came from in a historical sense. So I think asking for them back is absolutely something that should be done. I think that the places that have these artifacts now, whether it be, say, the UK or the US or whoever, ought to be helping these cultures to create the infrastructure that they need to house these artifacts there in the lands where they came from. I have to go eat dinner because my husband made dinner for me and I don't want to leave him hanging.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But it
Thank you.
was so nice to talk
Yeah,
to
thank
all
you.
of you. And I appreciate all your questions and I appreciate you all wanting to talk with me today. It was really great.
Thank you. We don't want to
Thank you so
hold
much.
you up any longer, but yeah. The project I'm working on is People of the Nile. You know, a analysis of the controversy, race and ethnicity of these mummies, and I'm hoping to like finish it before next year. But you know,
Uh,
it's a work in progress.
Excuse, how can we contact you? Sorry.
What'd you say?
What did you say, Farouk?
Excuse, how can we contact you?
I'll put my email in the chat.